Hey everyone! If you listened to our season 14 finale, you know that my co-host Leah is gearing up to welcome her daughter into the world this month. On account of that, we are taking a small break from our regular episodes, and in the meantime, we'll be delivering a handful of Hasty History episodes. If you are not familiar with Hasty Histories, these are bonus episodes that we are calling No Nonsense, Crash Course, Cram Session, History Lessons. So there will be no cocktail segment, no ads, and no bloopers. This is just a quick download of some heavy history content. If you enjoy longer podcast episodes with lots of back and forth conversation over unique cocktails, we recommend checking out our regular #history episodes, which drop weekly during our regular seasons on our regular feed. But as for now, let's get to this week's topic. This week, we will be discussing the Saskatoon Freezing deaths, a series of deaths of indigenous people in the Saskatoon, Saskatchewan area between the late 1970s and into the early 2000s. It was discovered that the Saskatoon Police Service were taking indigenous people on what became known as Starlight Tours, in which they would pick up an indigenous person, sometimes because they were drunk, sometimes due to disorderly behavior, and sometimes for no reason at all, drive them outside the city limits and leave them stranded in sub-zero temperatures with no alternate fate to a horrendous death. This was all brought to light when, in January of 2000, a man named Darrell Night survived one of those horrendous tours and filed a complaint against the Saskatoon officers involved. This is an awful and shocking story that many have attempted to erase from history, so let's get right into it. We know this horrendous practice took place over several decades, but I'd like us to start in 2000, as that is when this disgusting nightmare came to light. As previously mentioned, in January of 2000, January 28th to be specific, a Cree man named Darrell Night was picked up by the police in Saskatoon. A little intoxicated, Night thought the officers were going to take him to a drunk tank. Rather, they took him on a Starlight tour and drove him 3 miles outside of the city. When they kicked him out of the car into the sub-zero temperature, Night was wearing only a jean jacket and t-shirt. Unlike others before him, which we will be discussing shortly, Night was able to reach a safe location before the frostbite killed him. He walked 2 miles in the freezing Canadian winter and made it to a power station where a watchman was able to help him. So many others would not experience a similar fate. In fact, the same month that police took Night on a Starlight tour, the body of Lloyd Dusty Horn was found just outside Saskatoon, having frozen to death. And just 1 day after Night survived, the body of Rodney Nastis was found, again just outside of Saskatoon, and again frozen to death. And finally, just a few days later, another body, that of Lawrence Kim Wegner, was found in a similar location and in similar conditions. This is disgusting. Night would file a complaint against the officers, something that took a lot of strength and bravery, given the fact that Night would receive death threats for exposing this truth. It will come as no surprise that the 2 Saskatoon police officers involved in Night's near death, Constables Dan Hatchin and Ken Munson, denied any allegations of foul play. Rather, they stated that Night had requested they drop him off at that location. Please. Fortunately, this wouldn't fly, and the 2 officers were eventually convicted of unlawful confinement and sentenced to 8 months in prison. Now, of course, we as listeners, and of course, First Nations people of Canada, knew that these were not isolated events. In fact, the very fact that the term Starlight Tours existed is proof enough that these were recurrent. Scholar Shireen Razak said as much when she said, quote, that there is a popular term for this practice is testimony to the fact that it happened more than once. The practice of drop-offs is a lethal one when the temperature is minus 28 degrees Celsius and if the long walk back to town is undertaken without proper clothing and shoes, unquote. Despite this, the Saskatoon Police Service of course attempted to state that these were indeed isolated events. The local people knew better and pushed for better. As the director of the Native Law Center said, quote, "If it wasn't for Darrell Night, we would still be muddling around. We knew the people died suspiciously, but we could never get enough connecting evidence to say why they died. But with Darrell Night, all of a sudden the pattern was there. We could see it clear. Clear enough the province has said we need an inquiry," unquote. An inquiry indeed. This inquiry would actually lead to the Saskatoon Police Chief, Russell Sabo, admitting in 2003 that his department was responsible for the Saskatoon freezing deaths, even admitting that as far back as 1976, there was documentation of an officer being disciplined for dropping a woman off on the outskirts of the town. This inquiry would also force the department to look back at the death of a teenager named Neil Stonechild, a death that occurred 10 years prior. In November of 1990, Stonechild's body had been found on the outskirts of Saskatoon, a shoe missing from one foot. An initial investigation by the Saskatoon police determined no foul play, of course, but 10 years later, after the deaths of Dusty Horn, Nastus, and Wegner, and the near death of Knight, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police opened an investigation into the death. This investigation would lead to a 2004 report which confirmed that Stonechild had indeed been in police custody that fateful night in 1990. His family would not receive this justice for nearly 15 years. Unfortunately, to this day, the deaths of Nastus and Wegner have been ruled inconclusive, and I was unable to locate information about the disposition of Dusty Horn's case. The Saskatoon freezing deaths speak to the condition and state of the First Nation people's relationship with local law enforcement. Despite the fact that Indigenous people make up only 5% of the total population in Saskatchewan, they comprise more than half of the prison population there. An article on the Saskatchewan Legal Aid website put it perfectly when they said, quote, "Over-policing in city areas with a high representation of Indigenous residents contributes to this inequitable power imbalance, makes Indigenous residents feel like they are constantly under surveillance, and is a function of systemic racism that unjustly categorizes Indigenous people as troublemakers," unquote. As we covered in one of our regular episodes, episode 43 about the American Indian boarding schools, which is a personal favorite and also one of our most popular episodes, so please go check it out if you have not yet. The Canadian equivalent of those schools, the residential schools, didn't close until 1996. As we also discussed in our episode 110, the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada is staggering. A study as recent as 2023 found that at the time, there were approximately 4,000 missing or murdered Indigenous women and girls between the years of 1956 and 2016. The Saskatoon freezing deaths were not an isolated event conducted by an isolated group of individuals. Rather, they are a horrid example of a systemic problem that was brought to light only because one man managed to narrowly escape death. Before we close out this episode, I think something really important to mention is just how much the Saskatoon Police Service is still, in more recent years, attempting to scrub the Starlight Tours from the public's memory. A section on the Saskatoon Police Service's Wikipedia page, titled Starlight Tours, was repeatedly deleted time and time again between the years of 2012 and 2016. Initially, a spokesperson for the police department denied that anyone internal could have been the cause of the deletions, but after an investigation confirmed that at least 2 of the edits had come from a computer within the police department itself, they acknowledged that this was indeed the case, though stated that they could not determine who exactly had done it. Sure. It's really important that we talk about this. It's really important that we don't allow the Saskatoon Police Service and other racist Canadian residents to erase, or quite literally delete, these stories from history. Do your part and spread the word. Thank you all, as always, for listening to another episode of Hasty History. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we encourage you to check out some of our full-length episodes of #History, which we drop weekly during our regular seasons. A thank you, huge thank you to my incredible, talented, and unbelievably supportive husband who edited this episode of the podcast. If you have suggestions for more Hasty History topics, please send them our way at #history1865@gmail.com or on our website at #history-pod.com. We want to tailor these Hasty History episodes to you, so be sure to drop us a line on any topic you love or want to learn more about. Make sure also to follow us on Instagram at #history_podcast, where we post lots of extras, including behind the scenes of recording, drink recipes, and so much more. You can also check us out online at #history-pod.com for all the sources used to put together this episode. Thank you all so much. Stay safe out there, and we will catch you next time.